And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday evening here with me in the car in New York. This will not be a full-length episode, but I wanted to get on here and talk about a very important event in boxing history. And boxing is not as big of a deal as it once was with the incredible success of mixed martial arts, the UFC in particular. It's still very important, but it's not the global attention-grabbing event at the level that I believe it used to be back in the day. But one thing with the sport of boxing, professional boxing, is the great rivalries. Whether it's going all the way back, Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney, Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta fighting 6 times. Rivalries such as those. And 51 years ago tonight was the second fight in, I believe, the greatest trilogy in boxing history, better than Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield, who fought 3 incredible battles, and better than Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, although Tyson Fury has said in his opinion he thinks that their trilogy kind of outdoes any other. That's just opinion. I'm not right, and he's not right, and I'm not wrong, and he's not wrong. We are just giving opinions. But 51 years ago tonight at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the same site as their first fight 3 years prior, this time, neither guy was unbeaten. Neither guy was world heavyweight champion. Smokin' Joe Frazier and his foil, and Joe Frazier was Ali's foil, but Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali fought in what was billed at the time as Super Fight 2. The first fight was called the Fight of the Century. That was March 8th, 1971, and it was Ali's third fight back from his 3.5-year exile period. It's way too involved and complicated to go into, but Ali had been champion, undisputed, undefeated. He'd made 9 title defenses from 1964 until 67, when he was pretty much thrown out of not just the sport, he was thrown out of almost everything. And Joe Frazier became champion during that period. There was a kind of a round-robin tournament. It's very complicated. They wouldn't have done it the same way now with social media. There would have been better ideas kind of bandied about. They would have come up with something other than what they did, which was this strange tournament. And Joe Frazier didn't actually win the tournament per se. Jimmy Ellis became champion, a terrific fighter, but somebody who nowadays would have been a cruiser, would have been a monster at light heavyweight or cruiserweight. But Joe Frazier won the title by defeating Jimmy Ellis, and he later fought Ali and defeated him via 15-round decision in what was billed as the fight of the century, and it was a fight that lived up to the hype and to what people's expectations. If you have 2 championship level fighters, it doesn't have to be heavyweights, and it doesn't have to be all-timers like Frazier and Ali, but you hope to see a competitive fight. You hope to see Hearns versus Hagler, in the mid-'80s. You hope to see Hearns versus Leonard. You hope to see Duran versus Leonard. That's what the goal is. And Super Fight 1 lived up to that hype. It was a great fight. It was neck and neck. It was close. And Frazier was going to win a decision if he had not scored that incredible knockdown in the 15th round. Incredible in the sense that Ali was up at the count of 3. It was a punch that should have basically sent him to the hospital. And as Arthur Mercanti said, I made sure I got Joe to the neutral corner, and I turned around and Ali was on his feet. I didn't even have a chance to even pick up the count from the timekeeper. I don't know how that happened, but that's what happened. But in between Super Fight 1 and Super Fight 2, Joe Frazier lost his title badly. He was overwhelmed and demolished by the dreadnought named George Foreman. Yes, for those youngins out there, yes, the same guy with the grilling machines, the same George Foreman. George Foreman now, among people under 30, is just known as the guy with the grilling machines that we have somewhere in the house, and not the fearsome, intimidator he was. And we talk about, and this is not wrong, just how intimidating Mike Tyson was with the incredible speed and power and the talent and the stare. George Foreman was just as intimidating, if not more so, because he was so much bigger than almost anybody that he would get in the ring with. I mean, you put George Foreman against Vitaly Klitschko. Klitschko's bigger, but he ain't that much bigger, and he sure as fuck wouldn't be able to intimidate Big George. But Joe lost his title to Foreman and needed to kind of go back to the drawing board. And Ali had a number of really good fights in the early part of the 70s. He lost a tough decision to Ken Norton where he got his jaw broken either early in the fight or late in the fight, depending on who's telling the story. Nobody really knows for sure. And then he beat Norton in a return fight. And then Norton actually had the the second crack. The first crack at Foreman's title, I believe, was the Joe Roman fight, the Jose Roman, which was really a terrific, action fight. It was over almost before it started. But Joe Roman was a really tough fighter, and he was not out there to fuck around. He went right at Big George, and George took him out of there. It was really, very exciting for as long as it lasted. And then George just obliterated Ken Norton. Right around the same time as the Ali-Frazier second fight. Now, Ali and Frazier had a bit of a complicated history even up to this point because they knew each other, and they knew each other going back years. And it's maybe obvious to say, but everybody in the sport of boxing is going to know everybody else if you're in the same weight class. People sometimes express surprise when Lennox Lewis told a story about, hey, I knew Mike Tyson when I was in the juniors. I mean, I guess it's something that needs to be said. People don't automatically assume, oh, well, of course they knew each other. But Ali and Frazier met for the first time in 1964, with Ali just 22, and I think Joe was around 20, and had just won the Olympics in 1964, the Tokyo Olympics of 64, and then that unbelievable parallel, which I've talked about, but if you don't know, Ali, as Cassius Clay, won gold in Rome 1960 Olympics, the light heavyweight medal, won the gold. Joe Frazier won the gold, Tokyo heavyweight 1964, and George Foreman won gold in Mexico City 1968. Just incredible that it worked out that way. But there's an incredible picture. It's actually a couple of pictures, but you can Google this. Joe Frazier, after winning the Olympics, went to visit Ali at his training camp. And I mean, it was set up in advance. It wasn't like a surprise visit. And Ali, yeah, of course I'd love to meet this kid. That's terrific. He won the gold, whatever. He took this shit very seriously. He was an Olympic champion. Of course he would want to meet another Olympian, even if they someday might end up fighting. So the story goes that Frazier, they meet, they shake hands, they clown around. There's no animosity whatsoever, even though they're in the same weight class. So they start kind of goofing around and smiling and giggling and laughing, and congratulations, champ, and well, congratulations to you on winning your medal. And then Joe Frazier, with the cameras, going, people are snapping pictures, says, do you have any advice for me? And he was very sincere in asking the question. This wasn't a bit. He said, do you have any advice for me, champ? And Ali says, well, yeah, lose weight and become a light heavyweight. And obviously everybody starts cracking up. And I think Ali was just fucking around. He was just being funny. I don't think that he was telling Frazier, don't waste your time. This division is mine, or you can't beat me. Maybe try something else. I think he was just fucking around. Lose weight, become a light heavyweight. Well, Joe Frazier, with those tree trunks in his lower half, they weren't quite as unbelievably ridiculous as George Chuvalo, whose legs, he looked like Ronnie Coleman, the size of his legs proportionally speak. It was one of the reasons why he couldn't knock the guy off his feet. He was literally like a tree in the ring. But they knew each other, and then when Ali was thrown out of the sport, they, you might say, became friends. They had a road trip. This was recounted in Ali's autobiography, which a lot of it I think was not real. But the story of Frazier and Ali taking a road trip together and becoming friends, that is real. That's part of public record. There was an audio recording of them in the car, which is a riot. But they were on friendly terms. And even though young Ali had made a lot of money boxing, he had enormous expenses with his court situation and legal fees, and just, that he wasn't allowed to box. And Joe Frazier, kind of very quietly, nobody talked about it at the time, was probably somebody would have leaked the story, but he gave him a decent amount of money, probably gave him, $50,000, $100,000, something like that. And the intent that Ali, when he would get back on his feet, of course he was going to pay him back. So Joe went out of his way to help this guy who, again, they might end up fighting if Ali's legal situation, ends up with him not going to prison. So that's what happened. And they had a really tough first fight, but it was the kind of war where there was almost no way for them to not have come out of it with a greater level of respect. As if Olympic champion, world heavyweight champion, just saying that and knowing that isn't enough. So they had a lot of respect for each other as combatants, as sportsmen, as warriors with the gloves on. And then before the second fight, they got into this weird dust-up on TV with Howard Cosell, and Cosell thought maybe they were kidding, but they weren't kidding. For reasons unknown, Ali's brother, Rahman, got up, and I don't know what he was trying to do. He was trying to, intimidate Joe Frazier. You got to be crazy. And they kind of brawled. Neither of them were hurt, but it was not a good look for the sport, and it would have been a much bigger story now, and everybody would have had egg on their face and been embarrassed. So that was the lead up to the second fight. The guys could still joke, and, they had a famous appearance on the Dick Cavett show where if you didn't know, you would have thought they were lifelong friends. They just had this unusual dynamic that didn't really stop when they became old men and they would see each other at functions, and Joe Frazier would go back and forth between, I wish I could rumble with that guy right now, we're so old, maybe I'll win. He would kind of be joking, but kind of sometimes he seemed like he was still genuinely aggravated over some of the shit that the guy had said to him over the years. But that was the setup for Super Fight 2. And it's not as great a fight as the fight of the century in 71, and then the kind of brutality and horror and beauty of the Thrilla in Manila, which was a little more than a year and a half after January 28, 1974. In point of fact, the second fight is the only fight that is a clear win for one or the other, but where not enormous damage was done to either fighter. Both guys fought very tactically on January 28th of 74, and Ali still had the foot speed. He wasn't quite as quick at getting his head out of the way of incoming fire. This was something that in the 60s, it was a thing of beauty to marvel at just how ridiculous his reflexes were. There's that famous clip that you've probably seen on social media where Ernie Terrell is loading up and throwing shots at him, and he is simply swiveling his head in multiple directions. It's almost like Neo in The Matrix or Agent Smith. It almost seemed that he had this radar sense that his skills were so finely tuned and they were at such an insanely high vibration, if you want to use that word, where you just couldn't believe what you were looking at. He still had the incredible upper body movement, but he wasn't fast enough. The reflexes were a little bit slower where he could not do that anymore. And it was one reason why Joe was able to hit him so often in the first fight. Joe loaded up and landed punches that I believe the Ali of 1966, he might land, but he's not landing as frequently and as viciously as he was able to hit him in the first fight. But Ali had great movement in the second fight. He was moving around the ring. He had just turned 32, but he was moving as far as the footwork and the hand speed. He didn't look that much different than he had in 66 and 67. He wasn't as sharp, but he was really close. And this is the last fight that you can point to where he really did the float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. He was on his toes, moving around the ring with that kind of numbing canter where you would think that you had him timed and that he was using a certain rhythm, but he really wasn't. He was just really clever. And it's why when you see, like Alexander Usyk and Lennox Lewis and Tyson and even the younger guys, Anthony Joshua, when they're asked questions, build a perfect boxer, when they ask questions like boxing IQ or ring generalship, they usually just immediately say, we have to go with Ali. He just seemed to know what to do almost all of the time. And yeah, he certainly fucked up in fights. The Norton fight, I think Norton broke his jaw because he was too busy talking and trying to make fun of his opponent. He got caught at the wrong time. So it can backfire. But he was moving around the ring, And when he wasn't moving, he did that thing that he was famous for, where he would kind of, in clinches, he would push his opponent down. Sometimes referees would warn him, and Carlos Padilla, to his credit, in the third fight, there were a couple of times he said, well, he didn't really just push down, he was kind of yanking on him. Can't do that. And Padilla warned him, knock it off, champ. You don't want me to take a point away. I'm going to give you one more warning, and that's it. Stop fucking around. And then he stopped doing it. But in the second fight, Frazier kind of seemed content to just get into these clinches where Ali and him were wrestling, and Joe was patient. He thought he was winning the fight. I don't have any reason to dispute the fact that at the end when he raised his arms, I think that he thought because he landed the bigger shots that night, which he did, he just hit harder. He thought that he had a lead early, but he didn't. And most people scoring the fight, you know, if you listen to, again, you go on YouTube, which is such a treasure trove. I think there's two different commentaries, like calls, the overseas broadcast and over here, whether it's Cosell, whether it's Bob Sheridan, but they seem to think it was probably an 8-4, no worse than a 7-5 fight for Ali. And in the entirety of 12 rounds, the only time that either fighter appeared where they were hurt, oh my God, we might get a knockdown, was incredibly in the second round. The closest Ali came to flooring Joe in either the first or second fight was in the second round, where Ali landed a chopping right and Joe staggered, and anybody who is not as tough as Joe is taking a knee. They're going down. And when I say taking a knee, I don't mean deliberately taking a knee. I mean the balance, everything, the equilibrium is fucked, and you drop to a knee. And then in 4 or 5 seconds, he'd be okay, and he'll climb back up and let's go. Because the thing with Ali is that, yes, he hit harder in the 70s because he weighed more, and he was more likely to try to leverage his punches than in the 60s, where he threw these kind of short, chopping downward darts. He still threw those kinds of punches, but his tech was a little bit cleaner in the 70s. But the shot that stunned Frazier, he did not load up. That was not a big wind-up and a shot, but he landed it. He caught him just on the perfect spot of the chin, and if it's George Foreman delivering that shot, the fight might be over. If it's Lennox Lewis delivering that shot, the fight might be over. But Ali just didn't hit like that, and even when he fully committed to his punches, he was not a huge hitter. And that's why George said before they fought, Foreman that is, well, I really wasn't worried because he can't punch. And it's important to always note, when one fighter says of another fighter he can't punch, generally speaking, he's simply saying he can't take me out with one shot. Not that he can't literally punch or that he doesn't know what he's doing, but that he's not a big hitter. So Ali had Frazier hurt, and the referee, Tony Perez, a great referee, a really terrific ref who was in charge of a lot of championship fights. Tony Perez, with about 40 seconds left in the round, inexplicably, he heard the bell. There was no bell, but he heard something, thought it was the bell. He separated the fighters, and before they figured out, well, what the hell did Tony just do out there, Frazier had recovered, and when the fighters went to resume, made it to the end of the round. Now, there are some people that say, well, if Perez hadn't stepped in, maybe Ali could have stopped him. I don't believe that for a second. If he didn't stop Joe in the 13th and 14th rounds in Manila, he wasn't stopping him here in New York. It's almost inconceivable. That's how tough Joe was and how badly he wanted it, something that burned deep within him even when he wasn't fully, cognizant because he had been hit so hard. So the other takeaway from this fight, because I have it scored, it's an 8-4 fight, maybe 7-4 with 1 even, or 7-3 with 2 even, but I feel like Ali scores a clear points victory here. But even though both guys didn't necessarily, if you looked at their physiques, and Ali was in really good shape in this fight. As I said, this fight and the second Norton fight, physically he looked almost as trim as he had in the 60s, where, he was somebody that he had a row of ab muscles. Does this guy even do abs? Yeah, he does abs. But he had that kind of a body, and neither he nor Frazier necessarily had the incredible kind of cosmetic bodybuilder-ish look of the young Evander or Ken Norton or even a George Foreman if you want to go there. But their cardio was beyond anything you can imagine. Because you watch this fight And both guys are throwing leather the whole night, and Joe is pursuing it. He's not dancing around the ring, but he is pursuing. He's trying to close distance. He's trying to cut the ring off, as he would say. I just wanted the lip. I just wanted him. In the 12th round, both guys are pursuing like it's early in the fight. Neither guy looks winded. That is the level of conditioning. That is also how badly both of these guys wanted it. In the case of Frazier, if he had won, he would have gotten a rematch with George Foreman, and Ali had to win this fight to get the fight with Foreman, even though at this point in time, the public wanted Ali Foreman because there really weren't any other top enders for George to fight. Frazier was favored in their fight, and George steamrolled him. Then he crushed Ken Norton. So as George said, well, I beat both guys Muhammad had lost to, so of course I was very confident. I said, well, I don't think he can beat me anymore. Maybe in the 60s it would have been more competitive, but George wasn't even expecting a competitive fight. But the public wanted it, and not because, it would be a great story if Ali won, but because he was the next best fighter. Frazier, Norton, Ali. So that was really the only fight to make, and people, although most boxing experts felt, well, George is going to beat him, there were enough saying, look, styles make fights. There were people saying before the Foreman-Frazier fight, Joe's probably not going to have an easy night because this kid can really hit and he can take a big shot. But in the 12th round of Frazier, Ali 2, the guys are loading up, throwing huge shots. Ali gets to do the Ali shuffle. His hand speed is still, it feels like it's the first round. And not only could the guys have fought 15, they could have gone 20 that night. That is how finely tuned they were, how incredibly well conditioned. Because we've seen fighters who had the incredible physique who you still might gas out. And Joe Frazier, yeah, he was probably 215 or 217, but he didn't necessarily look like a guy that had endless cardio, but he really did have endless cardio. And when the fight was over, Ali had a pretty high level of confidence that he had emerged victorious. And I don't think that there was any information. This wasn't like the Shavers fight 3 years later, which I still can't believe, 3.5 years later, where they actually were releasing the scorecards round to round. So that night, when Ali went back to his corner after 14, and it looked like he was fucked. I mean, he barely made it back onto his stool. It looked like the guy was going to collapse. He knew that he had an insurmountable lead on the cards. Champ, just stay on your feet. Don't get caught in the corner where the ref can stop the fight. All you got to do is survive 3 minutes. Even if you have to take a knee at a certain point, just get back up. You're going to win this fight. But Ali being Ali, sometime during the rest period between the 14th and 15th, he said, fuck that. I'm going to beat I'm going to beat this guy. I'm going to knock this guy out. And he almost did. But that's the kind of fighting spirit that these two men had. As much as they wanted to, with each other, just as a, from a broader perspective, they burned to win like few others in the sport, laying it all out on the line, and literally in Manila, way more so than this fight, and the first fight as well. But they're willing to die out there. If this is how we go, this is how we go. And Joe Frazier maybe wouldn't have said it the same way as Ali. But Ali, deep down, if I'm going, well, who better than to be in the ring with Joe? If this is how both of us go out, at least we went out with each other. The two incredible combatants, the frenemies for decades. And then in the last, let's say, decade and a half of their lives, they were friends. Because Ali never had any animus for Frazier. It was all of the nonsense that he said and all the insults over the years. It'll be a thriller and a chiller and a killer when I get the gorilla in Manila. I mean, like, calling Joe Frazier a gorilla, it's not really very nice, even if you're joking around. So you can understand why Frazier, would get so frustrated. But it was a unanimous decision. I think it was 8-4, 7-5, and it might have been 6-5-1. If one judge had decided, or if the ref, Tony Perez, had called it a draw, it would have still been a majority decision. It's very, very difficult. Historically, Ali was the most difficult fighter to score because of the ring generalship, because he was going to win every close round, or almost every close round, because he just looked good doing everything in there, at least until he got into his late 30s. By the time he fought Spinks, not so much. But he had such a command of the ring, And there are a couple of rounds here where you could have given to Joe that I think all three judges gave to Ali for that exact reason. Joe was loading up and he landed some really nice left hooks. There's also a moment in the 15th round with about a minute left. It's one of the last great dodges of a haymaker level punch from Ali where he just moved his upper body, where Joe had Ali on the ropes and he threw an absolute missile of a left hook and Ali managed to get his head out of the way. That could have turned the fight if Joe had connected, but that kind of moved the round into a different direction where they're just going around the ring. Joe is pursuing, then Ali is pursuing, and it's just beautiful boxing and beautiful competitiveness of two guys at the top of the sport, not at their best necessarily, not in their primes, but close enough where there was still a good representation of their just stupendous skill levels. And then obviously Ali went on to defeat Foreman and Zaire, the famous Rumble in the Jungle. And then he fought Chuck Wepner, which, well, that was the birth of the Rocky saga for those who didn't know. And then he beat Ron Lyle in a really tough fight. And Ron Lyle, one of those guys, when you talk about the 70s being the best era in boxing, guys like Ron Lyle, Ernie Shavers, Jerry Quarry, and Jimmy Young would have been champions a lot of other eras of boxing, but just not in the 70s. They never held a share of either, the big WBC or WBA titles. 51 years ago tonight, Super Fight 2 at Madison Square Garden, Muhammad Ali evens the ledger, defeating the great Joe Frazier over 12 very hotly contested rounds of boxing. This has been episode 426 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me tonight in the car. You kind of helped me drive home. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.